They said the young wolf would never kneel. They were wrong. The day Robb Stark rode through the gates of King's Landing, with his bannermen flanking him, and Grey Wind kept muzzled in a gilded cage, was the day the North held its breath. 4 years they had chanted his name, cried vengeance for Ned Stark, and declared independence from the South. But when his sister Sansa was paraded on the castle walls with bruises on her arms and a crown of thorns on her head, when a letter bearing her blood-stained tears reached his hands, Robb changed. It was Catelyn who saw the tremble in his fingers first. Not fear, no. It was rage and helplessness all twisted into something that tasted like ash on the tongue. "We cannot win, Mother," he had said, quiet like snowfall. "Not like this. They have her. They'll use her until there's nothing left. You know Joffrey?" Catelyn did. Gods help them all, she did. So the raven flew. Terms were offered, and silence followed. Then came the lion's reply. Joffrey agreed to peace, but at a price. Robb must bend the knee. The North must yield. There would be no more king in the North. Robb Stark would be Lord of Winterfell once more, and Warden of the North under the Iron Throne. A position his father once held, but no crown, no rebellion, and most cruelly, no justice. Robb would come to King's Landing unarmed, alone but for a few trusted guards. He would swear fealty to King Joffrey Baratheon publicly. In exchange, Sansa would be released. The Riverlands would be spared further burning, and the heads of his bannermen would remain on their shoulders. He took the offer. The North spat when they heard. Lord Karstark called it betrayal. The Greyjohn walked out of the War Council in silence. Even Sir Brynden Blackfish wouldn't meet Robb's eyes for 3 days. "Your father raised you better," was all he said before he rode off. But Robb went. And so the king in the North became Robb Stark, Lord of Winterfell again. A boy who had known too much war and not enough mercy. The gates of King's Landing opened with slow groaning iron. His horse's hooves clicked against cobbled stone. The commoners screamed, not in welcome, but in hunger, in fury. They hated the war, and they hated Robb Stark for the deaths of their sons, their brothers, their food lines, and their empty bellies. Traitor, some called. Others called him butcher. He ignored them all. The Red Keep was colder than he remembered it from his childhood, colder and darker. Joffrey sat high on the Iron Throne, one leg draped lazily over the other, lips curled in that familiar sneer. Cersei stood beside him, eyes as calculating as ever. And Sansa stood still, stiff like a statue, wrapped in golden silk, a Lannister lion brooch pinned to her chest like a brand. When Robb walked into the throne room, the hush was thunderous. He stopped before the throne. He stared at Joffrey, that smirking snake of a king who had killed his father and paraded his sister like a prize. Then he knelt. Grey Wind let out a low growl from his cage. Silence. "I, Robb Stark," he said, voice steady, "Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, do swear fealty to his grace, Joffrey Baratheon, King of the Andals and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm." Joffrey's laughter echoed through the hall like a whip crack. "Well," he said, clapping slowly, "the wolf bends. Who knew?" And just like that, the war was over. But peace it was never going to be, because as Robb rose from the cold stone floor, eyes meeting Sansa's for the first time in years, he saw it. Not relief, not hope, just fear, and something else. A warning. The feast that followed was called a celebration, but to Robb Stark it felt more like a funeral where the corpse still breathed. Lords and ladies from the Reach, the Westerlands, and the Crownlands filled the great hall of the Red Keep, their laughter too loud, their wine flowing like mockery. The banners of House Lannister and Baratheon draped the walls no direwolf. No mention of the North's former glory. Robb sat at the high table, to Joffrey's left, his sword conspicuously absent from his side. He was dressed in crimson and gold, not by choice, but by demand. A symbol of unity, Cersei had said with a thin-lipped smile as the servants handed him the silks. It felt like wearing the skin of a wolf he'd hunted and killed himself. Across the hall, Sansa sat beside the queen. Her smile was perfect, but her eyes darted like a caged bird's, watching, calculating. She didn't eat, didn't speak. She merely sipped from her goblet, lips barely touching the rim, the wine untouched. Joffrey raised his cup. To Lord Robb Stark, once a rebel, now a loyal servant of the crown. The lords roared. The queen clapped softly. Robb nodded, silent. And to sweet Lady Sansa, Joffrey added, turning to her with that venomous grin, who proved more loyal than any brother ever could. Robb's fingers tightened around his goblet. Later that night, as the laughter faded into whispers and drunken nobles stumbled from the hall, Robb slipped away. The guards followed Lannister men, of course. His own men were lodged in the lower levels of the keep, far from him. He was the North's guest, but also its prisoner. He made his way through a back corridor, one he half remembered from his boyhood visits with father. He didn't know exactly where he was going, only that he had to see her. He needed answers, needed to know what her eyes had tried to scream in silence. He found her in the garden, where the moonlight danced through. Twisted weirwood branches and ghosts of old kings whispered through the leaves. She didn't turn when he approached. She didn't need to. "You shouldn't have come," she said quietly. "I had no choice." Sansa finally turned to face him, her expression calm, but the tremble in her hands betrayed her. "There's always a choice. You chose peace. You chose them. I chose you," he said, voice low. "You were the only reason I even considered this. They were going to kill you, Sansa. Or worse." Sansa laughed, and the sound was not soft. It was bitter and broken. They already did worse. A silence settled between them. "He watches me," she whispered. "All the time, Joffrey. He says he spared me for your sake. He says if I displease him again, he'll make you watch." Robb looked away, jaw clenched. "There's more," she added. "They're planning something, Robb. Cersei and Pycelle. Maybe even Varys. I hear them sometimes. They talk about the North as if it's already theirs. About how the Stark name can be used to control the other houses. Used to make the North forget who it really is." Robb stepped closer. "What do they want from you?" "I don't." "No, but they won't let me go. Not truly. This truce. It's just a leash, and you're wearing it too now." He looked into her eyes, and for the first time, truly saw the depth of her pain. This wasn't the girl he remembered. Sansa was hard now, hardened like winter ice. She was no longer waiting for heroes. She had learned how to survive the monsters. "They're going to kill you," she said softly. "Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. Joffrey will grow tired of pretending." He nodded slowly. "Then we need to make a new plan." Sansa blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Robb said, his voice quieter than the wind, "if peace is the only way in, then war must come from within." They stood under the pale weirwood tree, two broken wolves in lion's territory, and for the first time in years, they remembered what it felt like to fight together. But war had changed. This time, it would be fought in silence, in whispers, and in masks. And the North was watching. The days that followed were slow and suffocating. Robb Stark became a ghost in the halls of the Red Keep present, polite, always under watch. He attended councils he didn't speak in, sat beside men who had killed his kin. nodded at lies dressed as royal decrees. The Lannisters paraded their peace like a crown of roses, but underneath the petals were thorns dipped in poison. Joffrey, emboldened by Robb's public submission, ruled with renewed cruelty. His sadism no longer wore the mask of boyish arrogance. It had evolved into something far darker. He made a show of granting Sansa freedom, but it was freedom fenced by eyes and threats. Her chambers were in the tower again, the same one where she once stood, praying to die rather than marry the monster who claimed to love her. At court, whispers grew. The wolf's gone soft. Robb Stark bends easily, after all. So much blood for a crown he gave away. He bore it all with a soldier's silence, but each word cut like a blade. What they didn't know was that Robb was no longer fighting a war of swords. He was learning to fight the way Varys fought, the way Littlefinger thrived. And to do that, he needed the one weapon the Lannisters never saw coming: his sister, Sansa. She had survived this place, learned its shadows and secrets better than anyone. And now, the quiet girl they mocked had begun to whisper back. There. Plans started small. It began with the kitchen boy, then the laundry girl, then one of Pycelle's own apprentices, eager to betray his master for the right bribe and a promise of favor in the north. Piece by piece, they mapped the castle's inner workings. Who moved where? Who passed messages? Which guards were bought? And which ones hated their own king? It wasn't much, but it was the beginning of something dangerous. One night, under the cover of a fake fever that kept Robb from dinner, Sansa slipped into his chamber. Her face was pale, her cloak drawn low. "They've moved Arya," she said. Robb sat up straight. Arya? She's alive? She was in Harrenhal. Varys knew, and now Cersei knows. They've brought her here, but not as a guest. She's being kept in the black cells. They're calling her Rebel's daughter. Robb's heart dropped into his stomach. Arya, his little sister, the wild one, the sword wielder, the one father said would never sew and always fight. She had survived, only to end up in chains beneath the very castle that murdered their family. "I have to see her," he said. "No," Sansa said firmly. "That's what they want. If you go near the dungeons, they'll know you know. And if they know you know, she dies." Robb stood, eyes burning. "She's my sister. And I'm your sister too," Sansa snapped, stepping forward. "We don't get to play heroes anymore, Robb. Not here. You want to save her? Then play their game. Win their trust. Make them believe you're nothing but a bent wolf with no bite left." His jaw clenched. "And then what?" Sansa's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then we bite back." The moonlight made her look older. Not in years, but in the way pain sharpens the edges of someone's soul. Robb realized something then: she had been alone here for too long. Too long among lions. Too long learning to survive instead of live. He nodded. They agreed to work faster. They needed allies, quiet ones. Tyrion Lannister, perhaps, though. He had been strangely absent since Robb's arrival. Lord Baelish was always watching, but his price was never clear. And there were whispers of dissension, even within the Kingsguard. Sir Meeryn, Sir Burrows, they obeyed Joffrey, but not all did. So willingly. Then there was Margaery Tyrell, the new queen-to-be. Her smiles were careful, her gaze sharper than people gave her credit for. Sansa had seen it. "She doesn't trust Cersei," she said. "She wants power. Maybe we can give her a reason to help us take it." But plans, no matter how careful, were fragile. And it took only one slip to bring blood. 3 nights later, Robb woke to a scream. A high one, sharp, familiar. Sansa. He was already out the door, barefoot and half-dressed, before the guards could react. He ran through the halls, heart pounding against his ribs like war drums. At the top of the east stair, he saw the blood, trailing like a line of spilled wine toward her chambers. And when he reached her door, 2 Kingsguard blocked his path. "Move," he growled. "She's with the Queen," one said coldly. He didn't believe them. Not when the scent of blood filled the air. Not when his sister's screams still echoed in his bones. Robb shoved past the Kingsguard before either man could react. They drew steel, but he didn't care. He wasn't thinking. All he could see was the blood trailing beneath Sansa's door. All he could hear was her scream still trapped in the walls, like a ghost that refused to fade. Inside, the chamber was chaos. The room was lit only by a few guttering candles, their flames trembling as if they too feared what had happened. Servants knelt in silence, wiping blood from the stone floor. The bed sheets were soaked through, red and reeking. The smell hit. Him first copper and bile, sharp and metallic. Cersei stood at the far end, composed as ever. Her hands were folded neatly in front of her, though a faint streak of red stained the sleeve of her gown. Beside her, Pycelle busied himself with a tincture, muttering about too much stress and delicate girls. And in the center, crumpled on the bed like a doll discarded by a careless child, was Sansa. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling. Silent now. Robb's breath caught. He rushed forward, ignoring the guards that stepped after him. "Sansa!" She blinked slowly. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her skin was too pale. Her dress soaked red from the waist down. Pycelle made a noise, annoyed. "You shouldn't be in here. What happened to her?" Robb growled. Cersei raised an eyebrow. A complication. Nothing more. "She's bleeding," he snapped. "What did you do to her?" The Queen turned to face him fully now, her face cool. "She miscarried." The room spun. "What?" Robb whispered. Pycelle nodded absent-mindedly. "It happens, often, when the body is under duress. Poor thing was weak already. This might be for the best." Robb's voice was ice. "She was pregnant?" Cersei didn't answer. The silence said enough. Sansa closed her eyes slowly, and 2 tears rolled down her cheeks soundless and slow. Robb reached for her hand. It was cold, limp, trembling. "How far along?" He asked, though the words tasted like rot. "Not far enough to matter," Cersei said, walking toward the window. "Joffrey never even knew, and let's keep it that way, shall we?" Robb stared at her. He had always hated the Lannisters, but something shifted inside him now. This wasn't war. This wasn't politics. This was rot. This was poison from the inside out, and they had been feeding it to his sister every day. "You think I won't burn this whole castle down?" he said, voice barely above a whisper. Cersei turned back, smiling faintly. "You won't, because if you do, Arya dies. Your bannermen hang. And the North it's put under Lannister rule forever. You've already bent the knee, Wolf. You gave us the leash. All we did was tighten it." He looked down at Sansa again, and she finally met his eyes. There was no anger in hers, just exhaustion, and a deep, hollow ache that made him feel smaller than he ever had before. That night, he sat beside her until the candles burned out. She didn't speak, neither did he. But as the first light of dawn crept through the narrow window slits, Robb knew something had changed. This truce was a lie, a costume sewn from the skin of peace, but it bled every time it moved. They had hurt her. They had broken something sacred, and they had done it under his watch. He rose as the sun touched the bloody sheets. The time for games was done. If the North was ever to be free again, it would not come through more kneeling. It would come through fire. But fire needed fuel, and allies, and a spark. And the first one to burn would be wearing a golden crown. Robb Stark didn't sleep that night, nor the next. Something inside him had cracked, and this time it wouldn't heal. For weeks he'd swallowed their lies, forced smiles, tolerated the sneers and mockery, all for the sake of diplomacy. For Sansa, for the lives of his men, for peace. But peace had died the moment Sansa bled alone in that chamber, while the Queen watched like it was a game. Whatever soul he had held onto, whatever restraint, had turned to ash. Now it was strategy. Cold, ruthless, unrelenting. By the third day, he had begun sending messages. Not with ravens, those could be intercepted, but with people. Quiet ones. Sansa's kitchen girl slipped a note into the basket of food meant for Sir Balon Swan. A squire who owed his life to the Blackfish agreed to carry a letter to River Run. Even the mute stable hand who cleaned the royal stables had his part to play. The message was simple. The wolf is still breathing. To the north, to the Riverlands, to any who still remembered the Starks as more than footnotes of failure, it meant hope. And it meant fire was coming. But Robb also knew words weren't enough. He needed more. He needed a kill. And fate, as it happened, offered him one. The king had grown restless again. The celebrations were over, and Joffrey ever desperate. For amusement announced a tournament. A display of power and unity, he called it, though no one was fooled. It was blood he wanted. Robb was summoned to compete. Not asked, summoned. "You'll ride in the opening tilt," Joffrey said with a grin. "Show them the wolf still knows how to dance." Cersei watched her son with the same forced smile she wore around Wildfire, pretty but dangerous. Robb nodded once. "As your grace commands." The lists were set in the yard outside the Red Keep. Crowds gathered in droves. Lords from the Reach and Westerlands laughed as the banners of their houses flapped proudly above them. Robb's own banner-gray direwolf on white was flown, but at the far end of the field, near the stables. A reminder of his place. His opponent was Sir Lyle Crakehall, a brute of a man who had once laughed as Karstark men were flayed by Gregor. Clegane, a Lannister loyalist through and through. "Careful, Wolf," Sir Lyle grinned as he mounted. "I'd hate to break the king's new pet before he's house-trained." Robb didn't answer. When the horn blew, both horses thundered forward. The first pass was clean, both lances shattered against shields. The crowd roared. On the second, Sir Lyle clipped Robb's side, nearly unseating him. Joffrey laughed. "Looks like the North forgot how to fight." Robb looked up at the throne box where the king sat, sipping wine with smug delight. He met Sansa's eyes. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. That was enough. The third pass Robb shifted his weight just slightly, adjusted his grip, lowered the tip of his lance, and drove it straight into Sir Lyle's throat. There was no time for screams. The armor split with a sickening crunch, and Sir Lyle was thrown from his saddle like a ragdoll, blood spraying from his neck in great red arcs. The crowd went silent. Joffrey stood, sputtering. That he cheated. He aimed high. It was clean, said Sir Adam Marbrand, reluctantly. A brutal pass, but clean. Cersei didn't speak. Sansa stood slowly and left the royal box. Robb dismounted, tossed the shattered lance to the ground, and walked away without looking back. He didn't raise his arms, didn't acknowledge the silence, because he wasn't there to win. He was there to remind them. The wolf still had teeth. That night, more letters went out, quiet ones, carried by shadows, to White Harbor, to Deepwood, Mott, to the Eyrie, and one sealed in wax marked with a direwolf claw to Dragonstone. If there was even a chance that the rumors were true, that the last Targaryen girl had dragons, fire in her veins, and a grudge against Lannisters, then Robb Stark was ready to make alliances with fire and blood, because peace was dead. And war was coming again. King's Landing felt colder, somehow. Not in weather, but in soul. After the tournament, no one looked at Robb the same way. The noble lords of the south still spoke his name, but with caution now. His presence at court was met with stiff smiles, half-bows, and servants who no longer gossiped in his shadow. He had become dangerous again, exactly as he intended. Sir Lyle's death had made the message loud enough. Robb Stark was not broken. He had just been quiet, but it also made the game bloodier. Cersei's gaze grew tighter every time they crossed paths. Joffrey's laughter turned nervous whenever Robb entered the room. Even Pycelle had begun warning the Queen of northern instability. The peace Robb had bought with humiliation was now fraying at every edge. That was the plan. Because Robb didn't just want revenge anymore. He wanted the system that let this all happen to burn. And for that, he needed chaos. He needed noise. He just didn't expect the next move to come from Sansa. She came to him in the Godswood one dusk, her eyes swollen from crying, but something steady sat beneath the sorrow. "They're moving Arya," she said without greeting. "To Casterly Rock. Cersei wants her out of the capital before anything happens." Robb's heart stopped. "When?" "2 days, under guard. 2 wagons, no banners. She's trying to hide her. Bury the evidence of what's left of us." Sansa nodded. "Or use her as ransom later, if things turn." It didn't matter. Robb knew what he had to do. "We take her," he said. Sansa frowned. "Take her?" "Robb, she's underground, surrounded. We've waited long enough. If they get her out of this city, we'll never see her again." Sansa hesitated, then slowly pulled something from her sleeve. "A key. The squire who brings Pycelle's wine. He gave me this. It opens the eastern sewer gates below the dungeons." Robb took it. It felt heavier than any sword he'd ever held. "She's not alone," Sansa said softly. "There's another girl with her. Dark hair, older. Says her name is Elia, but I don't think that's her real name." Robb raised an eyebrow. "She doesn't speak like a servant," Sansa added. "She speaks like a soldier." He tucked the key away. "We'll bring them both." They planned it fast. No time for second thoughts. No time for fear. Gendry, the blacksmith's apprentice turned loyal shadow, agreed to guide them through the old tunnels. Sir Dantos, the drunken knight no one took seriously, finally proved useful by bribing the guards with wine he had quietly laced. Even the mute stable boy joined, slipping out 2 horses under the cover of the stable's midnight hour. By the time they reached the gate, Robb's heart beat like war drums. It wasn't battle, but it would be war. The sewer tunnel was slick and smelled of rot, but Gendry moved fast, lantern in hand, voice low. "They keep the girl on the 3rd level. There's 2 guards. Quiet ones." Robb nodded and drew his dagger. His sword had been taken from him long ago, but he had learned that knives made less noise. They found the cell after 3 turns, and a set of rusted stairs. Arya was sitting on the floor, legs crossed like a little wolf cub waiting for orders. She looked up, blinked once, then whispered, "It's about time." Robb nearly stumbled. Arya ... She stood and walked. Right up to him, punched him in the chest. Hard. "You took your time." He pulled her into a hug before the tears could reach his eyes. The other girl stood silently behind her, dark eyes locked on Robb's every move. "You're Elia?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Not my real name, but it'll do." "Who are you, then?" The girl gave him a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Someone who wants to see the Lannisters burn as much as you do." That was enough for now. They moved fast. Arya insisted on carrying a blade of course she had one hidden in her boot. Elia had her own knife, longer and curved like something from the free cities. They made it to the gate. Gendry cracked the last lock. Dantos had done his job. The horses were ready. And just as they reached the alley behind the Sept of Baelor, Robb heard the horn. A deep, echoing call from the tower. The city was awake. The guards knew. "We ride now," Robb barked, pulling Arya onto the saddle behind him. Sansa would delay the queen. She had promised. She would spill wine at dinner, scream, pretend she found a spider in her soup, anything to buy time. They tore through the streets like ghosts. In moonlight, Robb didn't look back. By dawn, they were outside the city, free, for now. But he knew the price had just doubled, and King's Landing would never forget the night the wolf stole back his blood. The sun rose behind them, pale and silent, as if even the dawn feared what would come next. Robb, Arya, Gendry, and Elia rode hard through the woods east of King's Landing. The roads were no longer safe. The gold cloaks would be searching them by now, along with any Lannister scout who could ride a horse and sniff coin. Every rustle of leaves felt like an ambush. Every crow's caw overhead made Arya twitch for her blade. They didn't speak much that day, not because there was nothing to say, but because too much had already been left unsaid. Robb kept glancing back at Arya, still half in disbelief. She hadn't changed as much as he expected. Her eyes were older, colder, but her spirit burned the same. She rode like a shadow, knife at her hip, every movement alert. A Stark through, and through. But Elia, or whoever she really was, watched everything. Every glance, every word. She never smiled, never asked questions, never offered answers. Gendry said she wasn't from Westeros. Robb guessed she was trained somewhere far, more brutal than Harrenhal. He wasn't sure yet whether she was a gift or a threat. That night, they camped in the ruins of an old holdfast deep in the Riverlands. The stone walls had long crumbled, but it offered enough cover to rest. They lit no fire. Robb gave Arya his cloak. Gendry kept watch from a half-collapsed tower. Elia sharpened her blade in silence. "I thought you were dead," Robb said to Arya once they were alone. Arya looked up from the bundle of dried meat she barely touched. "So did I. What happened after Father, after the Sept?" She didn't answer at first. Then finally, "Yoren smuggled me out. Cut my hair. Made me a boy. I saw people die every week. Good people. Bad ones, too. I don't even know how I made it this far." She paused. "And no one came. Not from Winterfell. Not from you. Not even a raven." Robb swallowed hard. "I didn't know. I swear it, Arya. I thought you were gone. Sansa did too. Doesn't matter," she said. "I'm here now. That's what matters." She turned her head. "But Sansa's not." "Is she?" Robb was quiet. "She bought us time," he said. "That may have been enough, or it might be the last thing she ever does." Arya clenched her jaw. "She's stronger than you think," Robb said. "I hope so," Arya whispered. The next morning they were found, but not by enemies, by a lone rider dressed in dark armor with no sigil. He came quietly, one hand raised. Gendry drew his hammer. Robb stepped forward, sword drawn. The man dismounted, removed his helm, and revealed a tired but familiar face. "Uncle," Robb said with stunned relief. "Brynden Tully." The Blackfish nodded. "We got your message. I've set up a camp 2 days north. Safe, for now." They rode with him, not wasting breath on questions yet. When they reached the camp hidden among the hills, Robb saw banners. Stark, Tully, Mormont, Reed, over 300 men, scarred, battle-tested, and silent. Not a proper army, but something dangerous, something awake. "You called, Brynden." said once they were alone, and the North answered. They've been waiting, Robb. They never stopped. What about the Freys? Robb asked. The twins are weakened. Walder Frey is dead, poisoned by one of his own. The sons fight amongst themselves now. The Riverlands are stirring. And Winterfell? The Blackfish hesitated, still under Bolton control. But the people there, they're restless. Even the Dreadforts, getting nervous. You return, truly return, with blood in your wake. They'll rise. Robb looked at the flickering torches beyond the camp, the faces of the men who had followed him once, and would again. Arya leaned beside a tree, watching him. I'm not a king anymore, Robb said quietly. No, Brynden replied. You're something better. They spent the night planning, mapping, and for the first time, Robb told someone everything. About Joffrey, the lies, Sansa, the child she lost, Arya's capture, Elia's warnings, the letters he sent including the one to Dragonstone. That's when Brynden frowned. Did you get a reply? Not yet, Robb said. The old knight crossed his arms. Then you should know something. 3 days ago, a black-sailed ship passed through the narrow sea. It bore a dragon's flag. Robb's pulse quickened. So it's true, Brynden nodded. She's coming, the Targaryen girl, with dragons. A moment of silence passed between them. She wants the throne. Brynden said, You want revenge. The Lannisters have both. Robb didn't respond, because deep down, he knew what was coming. Fire, blood, wolves, dragons, and the throne that cost them everything. The dragons came with no warning. One morning, the skies were clear. By dusk, they were on fire. Robb had just finished sparring. With Gendry in the training yard of their hidden hill camp, when the shadows passed over them, 3 black silhouettes sweeping across the horizon, wings wider than any ship Robb had ever seen. The earth shook beneath their cries. Horses panicked. Men ducked for cover. But the dragons did not attack. They circled once, then vanished behind the trees to the east toward the cliffs above the bay. That night, a rider came under white. Flags. A woman, veiled in red, eyes glowing like dying embers. She gave her name only as Melisandre of Asshai, and said that her queen had arrived. Daenerys Stormburn of House Targaryen requests an audience with Robb Stark, she said, her voice thick with power. She has heard of the wolf who walks in lion's shadow, and survived. Robb went alone. Just him, on horseback, through the moonlit woods until he reached the cliffside. There, with the sea below, and dragons perched like sentinels behind her, stood Daenerys. She was smaller than he expected, younger, too. But there was fire behind her eyes that had nothing to do with dragons. You summoned me, she said. I invited you, Robb replied. There's a difference. She raised her chin slightly. Why? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked past her to the black and red banners, the Unsullied, standing in silent ranks, the dragons that watched him with unblinking yellow eyes. Power, real power. And then he spoke. Because the enemy of my enemy is my only chance left. He told her everything, not as a prince, not as a lord, but as a brother who had lost too much and bled too long. About Ned, about Catelyn, about the betrayal at the twins, the broken truce with Joffrey, Sansa's pain, Arya's imprisonment, the child that never saw daylight, the kneeling, the shame, a fire that now burned inside him like it belonged to a dragon. When he finished, Daenerys was quiet for a long while. My brother once promised me the throne, she said finally. Said it was mine by birthright, but all he ever gave me was fear and chains. You gave them blood, Robb nodded once. I don't care who wears the crown, but the Lannisters must fall. She smiled, a sharp, cold thing. Then let's burn them together. 3 weeks later, King's Landing heard the roar of dragons. Not just in the skies, but in the streets. The North had risen. White Harbor sent 500 men. Deepwood sent 200. From the Neck came Howland Reed and his green-cloaked spears. Even old Lord Manderley sent ravens dripping with salt and fury. The wolf's howl has reached our gates, and we answer. Inside the city, chaos bloomed. Gold cloaks turned on their commanders. Red riots exploded. The small folk whispered of a wolf leading dragons, of fire from the east, of justice finally. Cersei tried to hold the gates, but Joffrey's madness only worsened. He screamed that the dragons weren't real, slapped Pycelle for lying, executed a stableboy for treasonous eyes. The day before the siege, he stabbed Sansa in the arm with a fork. "She belongs to me," he'd shouted. "She's the leash around the wolf's neck." He didn't know that the leash was broken, that the wolf had slipped it weeks ago. The attack came from land and sky. The Unsullied breached the gates while Arya led a band of Northmen through the Red Keep's forgotten tunnels. She slit the throat of 3 Lannister guards before they even knew they were dying. Robb stormed the courtyard with a direwolf banner behind him and Grey Wind by his side, freed and full of fury. And then Drogon came. When fire rained down on the tower where Joffrey hid, no one wept. Cersei tried to flee. Arya found her on the same balcony where Sansa had once stood, fists clenched in terror. The queen begged. Arya didn't speak. She pushed her off the edge. When it was done, the castle stood blackened. The throne room was cracked. The Iron Throne melted halfway through by dragon flame. Robb stood beside Daenerys in the hall where his father had once died. She looked at the twisted, half-melted throne. What now? Robb turned to her, blood on his armor, smoke in his hair. "Now you rule," he said, "and I go home." She raised an eyebrow. "You won't kneel?" He gave her a tired smile. "Not again." Daenerys paused, then nodded. "And the North?" "It remembers," he said simply. Weeks later, Sansa sat in the Godswood at Winterfell, snow falling softly around her. Arya stood behind her, short-haired and quiet. Robb stood at the edge of the grove, watching them both. They were home. And though the scars would never fade, the war was over. The wolf had returned, not as king, but as a survivor. And the North was free.